So that's me going through this at a somewhat rapid pace. At this point, I'm going to throw it open to the panel. And first of all, invite each one of the panelists to give their remarks on any or all of this. I'll be here to flip back to the slides if you want to refer back to them. I told the panelists they were not required, they were welcome to, but not required to present slides. And so they elected not to. So from this point on, it's an open discussion. So let's start with, we'll go from this way. We'll start with Matt.
Thanks. So I think, when I look at this concept of, secure by design, secure by practice, and, at the end of the day, our customers, the world, you have to start with a simple premise, right? Make the world a little bit safer, a little bit more secure. That's how I think about my job. And really, it starts, I think, with standards. And I think exactly to what Eric, and you'll probably hear more about this, is, the world's moving, shifting to a more real situation of attacks and vulnerabilities and risk, right? We all dealt with it for the last 30 years, but it's all becoming very personal now, right? Because you're seeing it in your homes, you're seeing it on the news, and it's affecting your day life. Right? And it's been affecting all of our lives for a long time, but now it's affecting everybody's. And so the sense of urgency to this problem is great. And to that point, regulators are regulating more aggressively, both here in the US and Europe. You'll hear some things like Europe's Cyber Resiliency Act. You'll hear in the US, we have a number of different, there was an executive order from a few years ago, Executive Order 14028. All these things say, do better, do more, make it more secure by design, by practice. You also hear earlier this year, the rollout, and Newber and the Department of Energy, it rolled out the supply chain principles, which are, again, do better, make safer, make more secure. And the good news is it's all directionally accurate. They all have sort of a common genome around making a secure by design practice applicable to things that both governments and consumers can use. The challenge, I think, is getting that adoption more globally and effectively across other companies. And to me, it really does boil down to the standards that you have to apply. And in our space, the industrial world, we focus on ISA 62443. It's the industrial automation standard that's been around for quite a while. And as Eric pointed out, started out through the ISA 99 program. And so this is not something that, this is just new. This has actually been around for, we want to say the number, but 23 years. So this is not something that's nascent. This is a well-established and very thick list of things to do. And the good news for many of you is that the large industrial companies, Honeywell, Schneider, Siemens, GE, we all embrace that standard. That's good, right? The problem is we need to get all the middle and smaller companies to embrace that standard as well. And that helps make sure that products that are produced, new products, new designs, have this baked in, this concept. And, so that's a journey. And that's part of the journey I think a lot of us are working. That's sort of my night job as well, is to inspire small, medium-sized other companies. Honeywell, we do that. Our entire development programs for industrial systems all are certified to that standard. We have more products certified under that standard today than almost any company in the world. But it's not enough. It has to get everybody has to be on the train. Everybody's got to be drinking the Kool-Aid. And we also see it as a way to answer some of these global requirements that are coming through CRA and other things. So we're actively participating. I met with over 65 different governments last year. Yes, over 65. Just to help harmonize on standards and regulations and to drive this, because it's not just my problem. It's all of our problems. It's all your problems. And so that's kind of how we perceive this. It's not enough to just make our products secure. It's about driving that behavior across a lot of other industries and other within our own industrial space as well.
Allow me to interject something before we move on to Nathan. I should have mentioned this in my opening remarks, but all of the panelists you see here today work for multinational companies, okay, with multinational, if not global, reach. So it shows you, if you didn't already realize, that the cybersecurity issue is global. And it's, as Matt so eloquently said, it's not something that you can address in a microcosm. So I have a question for the audience. How many people here have cybersecurity responsibilities or accountability or some combination of those for assets that cross geographic boundaries? Okay, less than I would have thought, but that's good. But it does add a dimension or an order of magnitude, basically, to the complexity of the problem, because particularly when you start talking about regulations and laws and so forth, now it gets very, very complicated. You heard Matt say 65 countries. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nathan.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate your remarks. The journey of standardization and adoption of standardization is something that I have some history with, but trying to steer that from the private sector point of view to hedge off regulation, meaning we'd like to do it our way. The best practice way, I guess, may not be the best way to say it, but with sound and approved principles. And when doing that, with no regulation in place and no particular standard, you look to finding the mix, the best of all of them. And fast forward that into many years, and there is regulatory statutes that are multinational and global and far-reaching. And now, with my focus being more global, I find that the same tenets typically are those best practices that are sound engineering principles on protection effectiveness. The one thing that I would say we're still challenged with is, as a consumer and as a cybersecurity practitioner, is trying to understand if vendor X or integrator Z has that same mindset. Is it just to get the system inoperable and turned over to operations? Or is it truly going to be built with security inside? Rather build it in than bolt it on later. And I think that the only way that a lot of the vendor community or private sector is going to do that is if there is some type of statute or regulation that says you must have this principle of due care and bare minimum baseline security that Eric was speaking to, because without that, there's no minimum bar, right? The problem that I think we're all going to struggle with is that bar is the bar. And if you want to do anything more, that's dollars, right? That's return on investment that you may not see other than that sense of security. So being able to demonstrate that you're resilient based on some standard is not just the compliance checkbox that we talk about. Security doesn't always equal compliance, and compliance doesn't equal security. But with these new technologies that are coming out that are enabling us to actually have security standards and be able to have an autonomous way of demonstrating these frameworks are equitable, and if you implement one of them, then likely you are secure or at least compliant with many other frameworks. So I think with your AI approach, we can get there a lot quicker. For me as a governance risk and compliance professional, I'm very much looking forward to those advances in technology.
Yeah, for those of you that don't are not familiar with Nathan or have not seen him speak before his current assignment, before his current job, he worked in the nuclear industry, so he knows regulations. Okay, Brad.
And the longer you guys talk, the less I have to say. Make it easier for me. Appreciate it. So from the ExxonMobil perspective, we're talking about standards. And I come from an area of being out in the field, boots on the ground, where every business unit had its own idea of what was best. And sometimes within inside of that business unit, each office had its own idea of what was best. It made it really hard from a standard standpoint where you're trying to support this, but you had to know 5 or 6 different systems to be able to support the hardware that we brought in, the software that we brought in, and be able to, from an IT perspective, be able to, bring this out further in the area as the field kind of grew. So on the ExxonMobil side, everything was a standard. So we have a set standard for how we were going to design and build something before it's even built, and we know how we're going to do it. So it takes us a long time to do that planning up front. Once we have that planning in place, it's easy for us to be able to kick that off and get that out to the field. That makes it easier because now I only need one set of group of people to be able to support this. Doesn't matter if it's globally or if it's local in one region, they can still support wherever they are in the field or in a corporate office, that design that we had come up with to be able to go. So the CISA, Secure by Design, is really good, right? We need a baseline in the industry to be able to go, okay, here's the bar, and this is what we need to do. But as we had currently heard, it can be kind of hard for a small business to be able to meet that or understand what they need to do. We're fighting a cultural aspect to where we need to get our cybersecurity maturity higher across the industry, all industries, to have everybody understand, hey, this has really big impact. Now, it's pretty easy up here because we're bigger companies, we can understand that impact. But the smaller companies might not understand that, hey, if you have this one small pipeline and everything flows here, and that's the only thing that you own, like it's coming into this terminal, if you have a breach, it can shut down the whole, Midwest, East Coast, West Coast, wherever, right? But the mindset isn't of, from a smaller company, okay, what do I need to do to be able to secure my hardware or my network? It is, okay, let me get this out in the field and it's okay. They are trusting the vendors to have gone through those security aspects of it and go, hey, this is secure. So we were talking previously where we're seeing a lot more IoT devices being put on the internet. And when we are looking at some of that, which is a good thing, right? We want to be able to have some kind of AI or remote or monitoring, et cetera, to be able to monitor all this, that when we bring this in, we're trusting the vendor setting it up, that they know what they're doing and they can secure it. But we're finding that's not the case. So it's on the internet, it's open, they don't change the username or password. And it opens ourselves for, a bigger attack surface that anybody, it doesn't matter if it's just ExxonMobil or any other company, if you're putting these things on the internet, you need to have a standard. You gotta have some kind of process and policy in place where you're looking at it and you go, okay, somebody just brought this hardware in, I'm documenting that hardware so I know where it's at, so it's not a surprise if it does get breached. And what do we need to do? What's the bare minimum we need to do to be able to secure this? We're finding as we're working with some of these vendors that are putting this out, and it's not really the vendors, I misspoke, but the people that are, the third parties that are going out and setting these up, the integrators. They're just assuming that it's plug and play. Kind of like your home network, you go in, you plug it in, and you're good to go. That's not the case. There's a lot of programming that needs to go into it. And if it's coming into like our OT environment or IT environment, we have specialists that are able to do that. If it's IoT, then it's a little bit different. It's kind of you set it up and kind of forget. So we find that, to be able to keep inching that baseline forward, we got to make sure we have a defined, line in the sand and going, okay, here's the bare minimum that we need to do, and then we need to keep moving that forward. And the only way, unfortunately, as we see, the only time that we tend to come up with policies, procedures is when we have a breach or there's a big incident that comes up. Then we find out, hey, we need to be able to really secure this. So I'm really for getting the standards, having that baseline in the sand so you know exactly where you stand and what you need to do.
I want to jump in on that because you made a really subtle but important point about, the reality is secure by design is not just a vendor problem.
No.
It's an integrator and owner operator. And it's a three-legged stool that industry at large, and almost every industry, by the way, industrial space has to adapt and work on. And sometimes we think of this as often just a vendor problem or an installation, but it's really, you have to make sure all three pieces are both educated to do the job correctly, but also then maintain that integrity correctly in perpetuity.
So before we pass it on to Rob, I had a couple of comments to also to build on Brad's points. First of all, when you talk about small companies, it's not always small companies. Sometimes it's small businesses within big companies. So in my former employer, we had businesses of very widely variant size and sophistication. So sometimes when you, for example, when I went to a facility in Southern Illinois where they made, anybody here familiar with the product Great Stuff, spray foam insulation? That's what they did. They mixed it up and they put it into cans. Pretty simple process. Not a very sophisticated operation. So we, even in a large multinational company, we had small businesses that weren't terribly sophisticated. The other point I wanted to make, and again, building on Brad's point, just kudos to ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is one of those companies, obviously a huge company, but very, very culturally committed to standards in the broadest possible sense. So company standards, for example, tremendous amount of discipline and buy-in to that. I find it very comfortable. I've always found it very comfortable working with people from ExxonMobil because my background is with Dow and we had a very similar culture. So we tend to think a lot alike. And I just want to give a shout out to, coincidentally, it's purely a coincidence, my co-chair on the ISA 99 committee is a gentleman by the name of Johan Nye, which Brad may know, who Brad may know, is a relatively recent retiree from ExxonMobil. So we come at it from two completely different industries, but we're both very much committed to the idea of standardization. And with that, I'll shut up and turn it over to Rob, your last but certainly not least.
All right, well, thank you. I'll try to keep it quick. I hope we can get into a
No, we have lots
productive
of time, so yeah.
discussion. I'll take a hard position on design, security by design. I learned this lesson in my career working for an internet content provider company a long time ago. They had a role, it was a job description and a role, and it was called a paranoid. I was a technical product manager, and when I'd cook up my ideas and pitch them to my architects, security was part of the conversation. It was part of the design conversation. It was often very painful. I aspired to run an agent as root in our production environments, and I had a lot of good reasons for wanting to do that, and just got beat up and down and had to go back and rethink things again and again and again. Finally, they gave me the green light, and we were able to deploy this agent in production. I don't know, it was across 126,000 nodes, 13 colos globally. But the rigor, the point is, the rigor that went in the early thinking around design was absolutely critical. And it's just like anything else that you build. If you don't think it through and you find yourself further down the road in development and you start refactoring and changing, it just gets expensive. And well, my term for it is you get a Frankenbuild. You get a Frankenstein's monster that's hard to recover from. So number one, it's a design requirement. It's got to be thought through in the beginning. Standards. I like standards because they feel like a roadmap. If I don't have a design, if I don't know what I'm trying to accomplish, the problem isn't accessible to me, and I lose sight of what we're trying to do. And so standards for me are often consensus-based. It's the best thinking that we can put together around certain topics. And it also provides an order of solve. And that's one of the biggest problems I see out there is that order of solve, the accessibility problem. Because we know we need to get a certain set of standards in place, common criteria in place, in order to manage out risk. That's what I appreciate about standards. Descriptive standards, not prescriptive standards. Let us figure out how to meet the standard. So yeah, security by design, standards are good as long as they create accessibility around the topic and help people make progress. I'll leave you with one thing. I know I said I was going to be quick.
No,
So
it's okay.
how many of
don't feel
you
rushed.
remember a report in 2014? Hold on, I got to dig back in the memory banks here. 2014, Department of Homeland Security, I believe they responded to 396 reported incidents, keyword being reported, in critical infrastructure. You guys ever remember seeing that? It only came out once.
Probably, but I don't remember, but I'm
All
sure
right.
I did. But
Well, it was like a 2-page little glossy thing, PDF, of course, and it came out and it said, you know, out of the 396 incidents that we responded to, 98% of them could have been mitigated or completely avoided with some basic security configuration and foundational controls. 98%. Here's the Department of Homeland Security going out and publishing this thing. I'll throw a little bit of a reason why I think they haven't published again since. And they said the other 2% could have been identified and mitigated with basic monitoring. Like, how simple could it be? And then, of course, if you add the 98 and the 2, that's 100%, and I'm not sure there's 100% security anywhere. But the point is this, they were talking about configuration, they were talking about hardening, application of basic security controls, like antivirus, whether you're a fan of that or not, in control environments, backup and restore, keeping systems up to date, and managing a manageable reference architecture. And then some basic monitoring, knowing what to look for and how to respond to that. So the reason I think they haven't published it again was because that 100% sort of message, right? I'm sure someone in management came back and said, dude, 100%? What, you published that? Nobody checked that out? But the point was, it really expressed to me the scale of the problem and the manageability of the problem. I love a good complex problem. I love digging into how are we going to solve this. But often what gets lost in those kind of problem-solving exercises is what do we need to solve and what's the order of solve? And there are a lot of really fundamental things that if you put them in place and you put the process discipline in place as well, you can manage out a lot of risk. That makes it feel much more accessible to me, as opposed to we need to secure a defense budget that's the size of a small nation and deploy all this stuff and manage it. In my mind, I try to put myself in the poor soul's position who actually has to take on the task and manage the problem. It feels very inaccessible. So I'll pause there. Hopefully there's some good questions out there.
Yeah, before I open it to the audience, just a couple of comments from me in response to your comments. I agree. In my experience, when I worked in the chemical sector, I worked very closely with our friends at the Department of Homeland Security. Coincidentally, Department of Homeland Security was formed as a response to the 9/11 attacks. And it was spun up at about the same time as we were starting the cybersecurity standards that now exist as 62443. DHS had regulatory authority over only a couple of the critical infrastructure sectors, one of which was chemicals. So I got to work very closely with them as they developed a lot of that sort of thing. And they tried many times to get out sort of basic hygiene kinds of things, which they did a great job. But I'll give you one story that just illustrates generating the information is only half the problem, probably less than half the problem. They put together, how many people here remember when DHS came out with a document that was procurement language for cybersecurity? Okay, we got one hand growing up. They put together a document and they said, this is a compendium, this is a catalog of statements that you should consider putting in your RFIs, your RFQs and your RFPs and RF whatever, and when you're looking to acquire technology. And it was meant to be a pick list. Go through it, read these things, understand them, pick the ones that pertain to you, and put them into your documents that you supply to your providers or prospective suppliers. Well, guess what happened? Where it didn't land like a dead flounder, when it did get into a company, it was routed to the procurement department. And what did they do? They stapled it to the back, the entire document, to the back of all of their RFIs and RFQs or RFPs, okay? And I see Camillo smiling back here. He might have received a few of those as working with a supplier. And so it completely missed the mark, and it was because people, they didn't understand, they hadn't read the instructions. But you know, there's there's an example of a noble effort on the part of DHS. That a lot of great work went into it, but it just didn't make it. On the other hand, if you look at the cybersecurity framework from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I apologize for using all these US examples, but it's had a lot of traction finding its way into companies where people have built their security response around the CSF. All right, so with that, I'm going to open the floor to the audience. And I'm going to go back to my questions, just as a reference, so you can remember them. So what do you think? Do you have questions for our esteemed experts, either from these questions or any of their remarks, anything that you'd like to pursue? Welcome, John.
Hi, Eric. John Cusimano with Armexa. So one of the things I'm seeing around secure by design, 15 years ago, pretty much spurred on by Stuxnet, we saw suppliers really step up in the space, right? So over the last 15 years, we've seen big gains in secure by design and ICS products, I believe. And we saw efforts like ISAsecure for certification of products. And that's one of the three legs of the stool that Matt mentioned. The one thing where I'm still seeing a weakness when out either doing design reviews or assessments is in the integration. So you can go out and buy secure products, just like you go out and buy SIL-rated safety products. But if you don't put them together correctly, you don't have a safe system, you don't have a secure system. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of the gaps is in the integration. Not so much by the big DCS, the main automation contractors, they're usually pretty solid. It's the integration of a lot of smaller package systems. And I guess to make it a question for the panel, what are you seeing or what are your organizations doing to try to help make sure that secure by design just doesn't stop at the product, but the design and the integration of the entire system, the bespoke control system?
Who wants to take a crack at
I
that?
can
Matt?
take a swing at it. So this is personally one of my hot topic because I meet with a lot of my peers and competitors. And by the way, for us as cybersecurity professionals, we don't see it as a competition. We believe everybody deserves this. So that's why we have open discussions through groups like ISA, Global Cybersecurity Alliance of Companies, which I'm the chairman for that advisory community. But the point of the story is we struggle as an industry globally with helping that whole integrator space. And I think more desperately needs to be done. Nate and others brought up the comment about, hey, we need to have a bar. And I think we got some pretty decent bars for vendors in terms of like, okay, whether it's NIST 800-218 or 62443. What we aren't doing enough as a whole community is driving that concept for integrators, right? And we need to not only say, hey, integrators, you need to be this tall to ride the ride, but you need to know these things before you participate, right? Think about it in typical, most of you are plant side, so one of the things you before you go on to a plant project or plant operations activity, first question, right? Are you safe, right? Are you trained in the thing you're supposed to perform, right? And if you're not allowed to go out on the floor, right? You can't do lockout, anything, right? And I think integrators need that same level of training when it comes to cyber. And I think we've got to figure out a way to not only create a massive amount of education, but consumable education for that community. One of the struggles I've watched over the last 7-8 years, because I've been doing this for 20, I'm not even going to say the number, a long time. A long time. And the struggle that I've seen over and over again is the federal government says, oh, we need more training. And so they throw out a bunch of money and it goes to the universities.
Yeah.
And universities are not the right people to go train some field engineer, right? That's the wrong, So great, universities build it into some bachelorette program. But great, wonderful. But that's not where your field engineers are, or your integrators. It's not there. They took a whole different path, which may not be getting a degree. And so we need to figure out a whole new way to get the money in a way that produces the kind of training that we want them to have. And we need it funded the right way instead of federal dollars going to something that it's sort of academic, truly, to something that's actually useful, that then we train all of them and certify them so that they have that experience, right? To me, that's how we change the game. And it's not just, by the way, this is not a US problem. This truly is a global problem. And it's also industry-wide. It's not just oil and gas. It's not just, nuclear space. It's not even aviation. All of them suffer the same set of problems.
It's funny, before I ask Brad or Rob for their comment, you're right, and I will make a plug for ISA, which is an organization, if you're not familiar with it, International Society for Automation. ISA did provide and has provided, continues to provide training for example, through the two-year degree programs, community colleges. They've also trained first responders and the military, National Guard, because you're right, it's not just four-year degrees. And so you've got to take a much broader perspective on who needs to understand this kind of thing. And anyone here, we've always drawn parallels between safety and security. I've visited both within my previous employer, but since as a consultant, I don't know, scores of plants and maybe more than that. And guess what? The first thing before you can get past the guardhouse is you have to take safety orientation, right? So if you're an outsider coming in, and presumably it's already been done if you're an employee, but in security, maybe not. But that kind of awareness and understanding is necessary. So with that, I'll just see if Brad or Rob have comments.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Matt was saying here. So in our space, we do spend a lot of time talking to those that we do find that had an insecure hardware and or software, and we're explaining to them the need for cybersecurity. So to your point, we do need something where we as the consumer aren't having to say, hey, this is where the bar is and this is what we need to do. Somehow, again, we got to get that culture shift out there and that education and that training. And to Eric's point, I've gone through plenty of safety training. As soon as I go on site, all right, do you have your hard hat? You got your steel toes, right? There's a checklist you have to go in before you even go in to even do your safety training. Then you do your safety training and then they pair you up with somebody who's more experienced as you're walking through the site. We don't really have that in the cybersecurity space.
Know when to shelter in place and know when to run, right?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the windsock, right? So yeah, just to your point, there's got to be something better that we can do, and then how do we do it? But for now, we're taking on that, right? Yeah. We are just showing, hey, our maturity is here, and this is what we expect. And then now it's not just plug and play. You got to do these steps and then plug it in.
Yeah, sorry, Nathan, I didn't mean to skip over you. That was an oversight. So go ahead.
But and I think a lot of companies, including ours, we train our people into those same skills, and we also incorporate, like in our products, hardening guides that describe what you want to do. But those are great and useful for if you're just buying my product. That's great. But this is not something that should be product specific. Honestly, this has got to be a behavior and a global change. So, yeah.
I would just say, to John, your question about how do you solve that problem? I don't know how to solve it, but as a consumer, I look to the project management team to bake that work ledger item into the scope of the project. Cybersecurity from the start and all the way through to factory acceptance testing or, the proof of minimal viable product, right? It shall be secure. And until you force that integrator to do it, you're likely not going to get it unless you've already paid for it, right?
Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
Just one thing to add.
We have another question, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll be quick.
Yep.
I'm going to go back to that secure reference architecture. I'm already kind of putting my product management hat on, like how do we get this adopted and get it out there? Thankfully, I didn't hear that the OEMs are the problem. We can be the problem, but we think in terms of secure product development, secure deployment, that kind of stuff. But once it's footprinted, it's done. who knows what changes, who puts what in there, those kind of things. So problem-solving mode here, I would make it part of design requirements, right? If you're selecting a vendor, do they actually have some secure design, secure deployment artifact that they propose to you? If they don't, I wouldn't touch them. And secondary to that, make it part of acceptance testing and commissioning criteria. You don't get your money, I won't take the asset unless it meets these criteria.
Okay, we're going to move on to the other question, but just one quick before we do. John, did you get useful feedback on your question? I did. Okay, good. Yeah, yes, thank you. And by the way, if you don't know John, I'm going to give him kudos where kudos are due. John was the principal author of one of the parts of 62443, which is on risk assessment. So he's contributed greatly to the industry over the years. And we have another question.
Robert Jackson from Moxa. This might build on something that Brad and Nathan answered, and then maybe Matt and Rob might be more of a direct question to you. With the new Cyber Resiliency Act, or CRA, coming out of Europe, my understanding is that would be connected to the CE mark, which applies to most products globally. So, although it might address some topics Nathan and Brad brought up, maybe for the other two, how do you see the response being? And I know it's a tough question. I know this is still years ahead, but I'd love to
It's
see,
not that
get your
far off.
thoughts. Yeah. 1 year for the first phase and 2 years for the final.
Before we get to the answer, for those of you that may not be familiar, CRA, the abbreviation, it's the Cyber Resilience Act in the European Union.
Yes, so I'm deeply personally involved in CRA. I've met with actually European Parliament on this topic and with the rapporteurs who were responsible for it. So I spent a lot of quality time on this topic. What I would tell you, I made a comment when I opened up about spending so much time with governments last year. One major reason, because there were some challenges in the design of CRA that, if left unattended, would have created enormous, profound impact to the industrial space and in particularly commercial companies. And I felt, this is one of those things, it's sort of my night job. It's not my day job. My day job is I'm the Chief Product Security Officer for Honeywell for all of their products. But this was so important that I reached out and worked with my peers in Schneider Electric and Siemens and others. And literally, we could talk each other's words in these meetings. We would show up together. And it was a very unified message to the regulators on some key topics around, how certification should look. And what should that, how should companies like us? And a lot of the conversations ended up with, that wasn't the way it was intended for. I understand, but that's how we're interpreting it now. Yeah. And we were able to get some changes to that. And so, which is good, it helps everyone, by the way. But more importantly, how we're trying to drive is we're trying to actually use 62443 as a basis for demonstrating compliance to Cyber Resiliency Act, right? And so this has gotten a lot of traction, and they're actually in the development stage of creating standards. So Europe does regulations a little bit differently. In the US, we sort of create a regulation, and then we pick things to demonstrate its compliance, like a regulatory guide. In Europe, what they do is they create a regulation, and then they go to a standards body and say, I want you to create standards for this. And so they'll go off and craft, and like in this case, there may be 26 or 28 new standards just for this, which will be enormously complex, enormously bureaucratic. And for those of you who remember GDPR, right, and how that's just Europe. Now GDPR is for everybody. Every country, every company does it. Why? Because you have to, in order to participate in Europe. Well, guess what? CRA is going to be exactly the same thing. And so as a company, we think about this very sensitive because you better help make that be the right thing now, so that when it actually gets rolled out 2 years from now, it's something you can live with. And so that's one of the reasons why we felt compelled to be engaged in it. But more importantly is, we're trying to use 62443 as an example of a way to demonstrate good cybersecurity. As John and others pointed out, right? It speaks to not just the vendor, it speaks to the owner-operator giving guidance and the integrator. It is the only standard of its type that does this. And we think that was in itself one of the reasons why the regulator around CRA were open-minded. Now again, there's a lot of time between now and then. But we feel like we've got it on the right trajectory. It's sort of, directionally accurate to a good thing. So that's how we're seeing this as we go down. We'll see what produces out of the standards over the next 12 to 18 months. And ideally, those things will sort of weave together. But it's all about harmonization starting now.
Fortunately, we have in the community that's responsible for 62443 in ISA 99 and IEC Technical Committee 65, Working Group 10, we have several people who are also very heavily involved with Senelec in Europe, setting the European
Senelec
standards. So hopefully there will be continuity. Under this heading of working with government, I cannot resist. I have to tell you, those who know me know that I love to tell stories. I have to tell you a story going back many, many years, quite a few years now. When the U.S. formed the critical infrastructure sectors, defined the critical infrastructure sectors, one of the tasks they had was to align each one of the sectors to a regulatory agency in the federal government. And their first trial balloon was, for the chemical industry, was, the agency that's going to regulate you with respect to cybersecurity standards is the Environmental Protection Agency. You can imagine how that went over. It went over like a proverbial lead balloon. And that's why we ended up with the Department of Homeland Security. And the reason was the relationship between the chemical sector and EPA was, shall we say, contentious. And the reason for that was the EPA had this propensity for telling us not only what we should do, but how we should do it. And so when they said EPA is going to be responsible for regulating your security response, the chemical industry writ large rose up on its hind legs through the American Chemistry Council and said, not no, but hell no. And so that's how we ended up where we are today. Sorry for that long-winded story, but any other comments on this subject?
Yeah, I got a quick one. So Matt and Rob were talking about, standards, and I guess I was even talking about it. So where I see the standards is that it gives us again, the baseline, but I'm proactive. I'm no longer having to be reactive. That makes me really nervous when I don't know something and I have to be reactive to it, that at least when I have a standard and I know what it is and what that design is going to be, I know what needs to be done and what steps.
I want a question from this side of the room. We have two from this side of the room. Any questions over here on this side of the room? Come on, don't be shy.
Okay. James from S-Rock Industrial. Actually, we are a industrial PC provider, so we provide hardware. But and our product now also meet the IC 62443-4-2. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious that because we only offer the hardware, the system integrator will use the software to combine with the hardware. But how do they secure the combination of the hardware and software can meet the cybersecurity requirement, like a -3 requirement? And then the asset owner, the end users, how do they secure that, make sure the system integrator, maybe they also work with in the brownfield, so with the other equipment. But how do they make sure that the system integrator and with the existing asset can also meet the -2 requirement? Because the only way to make sure the entire asset is secure is that you have to make sure everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's my question.
Let me try to take that as with my other hat on as the co-chair of ISA 99. If you're familiar with this, if you are familiar, but if you're not familiar, let me just go down a few inches into the rabbit hole of the 62443 standards, because it gets complicated very quickly. But there are two standards in the 62443 series that are probably most germane to this question. You mentioned one of them, 4-2, which is security of components. It does not say software components or hardware components, it says components, okay? But there's a higher level standard, 3-3, which says these are the overall system security requirements. And those two are they're intimately connected. So the short answer to your question is whoever is integrating hardware and or software components into a system is responsible to make sure that the components are securable. I use that word very advisedly, and that the assembled system meets the requirements for security. Now, I'll let the others comment. The last comment I'll make is the two committees responsible for 62443 that I mentioned earlier, ISA 99 and TC 65 Working Group 10, we have an effort underway right now to rewrite those, not rewrite, but to revise and upgrade those two standards. When they were, the first edition were written, the first editions of those were written, they were written by two different teams. This time, one team's doing both of them at the same time to try to get that seamlessness that you're talking about. So I'll stop there because I could go on, but any other thoughts from the group?
Summed it up.
Okay.
Yeah, the only comment I would throw in practical is because, you know, we have lots of vendors and suppliers of our own that produce things that meet, may not be certified directly, but meet the requirements. And exactly what Eric's talking about, in practical execution, right, it's all about testing, right? Because, you know, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing. You got to be able to testable, right? So, okay, great. You produce a piece of hardware that's meets that spec, great. Add the app, and the app's got to follow an SDLC that meets 62443 as well, and its applicable components, right? Great. That's testable. That's certain. Even in fact, it is certifiable, right? Because you could go all the way through. So there's ways to do this very easily. The third part, though, is then now you brought up the point. How do I make sure it's deployed securely, right? Well, including the hardening guides, both yours and the softwares, right, tells the integrator what to do. And if the integrator should be competent in the standard to deploy it securely. By design, hopefully, if somebody's buying this, they should have, the owner should have already known they're getting something that's secure and has already expressed their interest, as others have pointed out, that this is part of the requirement set, so that ultimately the owner-operator knows they have to keep this secure, perform it securely, and then at the same time, make sure that all the subcomponents are securely, because you showed your hardware, software shows its security, all of it's testable, and it's deployed successfully. And you do SAT and FAT, you know, factory acceptance testing to ensure all of these points.
Yeah, a couple of points just to add to that. First of all, jargon alert, my jargon alarm went off. SDLC, for those of you that aren't familiar. Software development lifecycle. But yes, I agree with everything that's been said. The point I wanted to make is if you've been hanging around in the security space for a while, you've heard more than once that there are parallels between security and safety. So I'm going to use a safety analogy, and John's still here, so he'll relate to this because John's a safety guy in his heart and soul before he get into security. People would ask in the safety space, in safety, they have these things called safety integrity levels. And they would say, what does safety integrity, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, I may be wrong in this interpretation, but they would say, what does it mean when they say this component is safety integrity level 2? And I said, well, what it means is it's capable of operating and delivering the required functionality in a SIL 2 system. It's not inherently, it's less important, well, I should say important. It's not really the component by itself because the component doesn't work by itself. It works in a system. And it's the system that is certified, not necessarily the component. Am I right on that? Yeah, so security is similar. Now we've got about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes before I'm going to do a real quick wrap up. So maybe one question more, or maybe two. Sid, I thought you were giving me telling me I'm out of time.
No, that wasn't it at all. No, I'm just sitting here because I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. I mean, every day I get copies of all these CVEs that are coming out. I don't read them because I don't have to deal with them, okay? I mean, but it's every single day we're getting stuff. And CISA's announcing this product problem, this product problem. Now, what I'm hearing, though, to be honest, is, number one, and I'm not questioning any of the things you said. I think they all sounded good. They're all firm. They're all sound. But in the end, there are vulnerabilities in products. And I don't know if, and when we started off, I got the impression, I think, Matt, you said it, you said, well, we're a big company, so we pretty much got that. I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the impression I got was, we've got ours under control. And I know you do have lots of products certified, and you've got good practices and all that, that's good. But still, and then after that, what I started to hear was, well, the real problem is with the integrators, or the owner-operators aren't maintaining it. And then I talk to owner-operators, and they say, well, we're not allowed to change any of this product. I mean, I'm just wondering, because, I mean, other people say secure by design, secure products is a critical issue. And a lot of people are trying to address it, as you mentioned, particularly in Europe, you have those kind of laws in particular. So somehow, though, I'm getting a mixed message here. I'm kind of hearing, it's the old, not me, it's all them.
Yeah,
and let's just solve it by doing it. So anyway, I just thrown it in to be devil's advocate here.
Yeah, so let me answer that, because that is absolutely not you'll hear this concept from me a lot, and that is cybersecurity is a team sport. And so this discussion was largely about secure development, right? And so we talked mostly on that. But the point I think you're trying to make is really, what is it, how do you keep it secure? How does that stay secure? And the fact is, the minute something rolls off the manufacturing line, right, it may, if it has open source software and open source OS, which many products do, it's going to be at risk. How do you manage that? Well, see, this is also part of that larger ecosystem that you have to think about, which is patching, right? As vendors, we got to make sure that we're thoughtfully providing regular patches, not features, patches, very different, on an ongoing, regular basis to say, look, hey, there's new updates. There's new updates to the operating system. There's new updates to the software, all of these things. And it's really dependent on the vendors to provide that, absolutely. And then we have to make sure that the operators and integrators consume them by applying them. And I know a lot of people have this thought of like, well, 7x24, I can't, take maintenance hours, and so we're going to postpone. We're going to put all these firewalls. I respect that, I do. But at the end of the day, nothing beats patching, right? And we got to figure out how to navigate and patch more frequently, and not see plants and facilities get out of sync with that. I get it, but again, it goes back to my point. It's a team sport. Vendor, the integrator, and the operator have to be in that couple, that relationship that keeps driving that constant need to be secure, stay secure, and staying on top of things. It is no other way.
But what responsibility does the vendor of the OEM, a Honeywell, okay, or an ABB, have to make sure that the products, all the stuff they put into their product is designed? The same thing as you're saying, I mean, like an owner-operator, the supply chain issues here.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand you use it, and that's how that stuff works, but at some point you have to say, but we're responsible for it. And maybe you are saying that by saying, we can't, the problems will happen. Everybody knows things are going to happen. But when we're in, the only thing you can do is be responsive to it. So I'm kind of curious about that. So I don't know if I expressed that again.
Yeah, in terms of like, our responsibility as products, yeah, I mean, we obviously have warranties and things like that are part of any of those programs, right? And again, we see our relationship with our customer as more than just a transaction. And so we typically, if there's challenges, we're there. We lean into this problem. And like, it's just like the discussion about regulation. That wasn't my day job, but I did it because I thought it was critical for the industry at large. And I think in general, most of my peers in larger companies all feel the same way, that this is something that has to, we have to drive that knowledge and that experience. And we also have to create the sense of urgency to patch and to apply patches. And frankly, when things don't go well, make sure we're reaching across the table and helping them through, right? Because it's not about whose fault it is. It matters that they're down, right? That's where we are going to, no matter whose problem it is, we're going to lean in and do our best to help them be better and be safe.
This is a good segue into a couple of closing slides I have, because we're almost out of time. But before we do, Rob, do you want to make a comment?
I just wanted to respond to Sid. And so as I was listening to the question and some of the responses, it seems like there's a missing security program element here. So your environment will go down, right? Your threat modeling, you're trying to understand, what elements of risk do we target and manage? How do you bring it back up? So without finger pointing, is it the OEM's responsibility? Is it the asset owner's responsibility? You should assume that it's going to go down. How do you identify that? What's your plan to respond to it? Resilience, and then how do you bring it back up? So I'm seeing a lot of just process discipline piece there.
Okay, let me see if I can wrap up. And as I do, I have to tell you, I was very puzzled with that phone ringing, trying to figure out where it was coming from, and finally found out that somehow my phone had paired with this PC using Bluetooth. And it was the PC that was ringing, not my phone. But
You go wrong.
yeah, I didn't think I had Bluetooth on my phone. But anyway.
Patch him.
Yeah, it's hard not to. It's the first time that's ever happened to me. I got a couple of slides just to wrap us up here today, because we've only got about 10 minutes left. And I know you're eager to get to the casino night and the reception. So I got 2 slides. Call to action, one for end users and one for suppliers. And I will say, with, in spirit of disclosure, I wrote these long before we had this conversation. So were I to write them again or later, they might change. But this is what I was thinking of when I put these slides together. And the list is longer for end users because, like I said, I was an end user. So obviously, conduct your risk assessments. Know what your risk is. Focus on the consequence element of risk. No one else can define that but you. A vendor can't define it. An integrator can help you define it. And this is where the difference between responsibility and accountability becomes crystal clear. Your partners, be they suppliers or integrators, have responsibilities as defined in their respective contracts. At the end of the day, to paraphrase Harry Truman, the buck stops with you. It's your asset. Protect your assets. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Cover your assets.
Yeah. The other point is, and again, I wanted to stress that, have incident response plans. Incidents are going to happen. So be prepared. I can tell you from personal experience, your worst day is going to be when the first indication that you've had an incident is a call from the FBI. Okay, that is not a good day. The next one is invest in workforce development. We talked about that. Don't limit yourself to engineers, all the way down to the plant floor, the operations people. Make sure that they understand that security is just as much part of their world as safety is. Now, the difficulty there, one caveat, it's easier to sell safety because you can sell it based on, I'm here to tell you, you have to be concerned about safety because I don't want you to be hurt. Most people will buy into that, most rational people. Security, it's a little bit of a harder sell because they say, so we have a security incident. That doesn't affect me. I'm still going to go home the same way as I came in this morning. Engage with the suppliers. We've talked all about that. Know their development processes. Use AI, know about their use of AI in product development. I heard earlier yesterday, people talking about using AI for code development. The person said that gave them the willies. It gives me some willies too. But understand their supply chain and understand their stance on standards. So all of these things, messages to you if you are an end user. If you are a supplier, again, and we've heard most of these, I anticipated these, and I'm not surprised that we covered most, if not all. Focus on secure by design and secure by default. Provide comprehensive bills of materials, even if people aren't going to read them. And we talked about this last night. We said, you know, it's like buying a piece of electronics and getting a detailed schematic that came with it. 99% of the people are never going to need that schematic, and even if they did, they probably couldn't read it, okay? But provide it, make it available if it's needed. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Prioritize testing and certification. Focus on your supply chain. Know where all this stuff is coming from. Obviously, you can't provide bills of materials if you don't know where the stuff is coming from. And integrate vulnerability management and patching into that SDLC, the software product lifecycle, or the product lifecycle in general, writ large. So those are the kinds of messages I anticipated for the two constituencies in our audience. I didn't ask you, and a lot of people have left, so it's probably not worth doing a show of hands as to who here was an end user and who here was a supplier. And even those two distinctions are fuzzy because there's a person in the middle, the role in the middle for integrator. But at that, my watch says we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm quite willing to close up at this point unless there are any last questions. Going, gone. As a last comment, let me, on your behalf, extend my thanks to our esteemed panel for volunteering to share their vast experience and expertise. These are some very smart people with a lot of very practical, useful experience. And gentlemen, I appreciate your willingness to speak here today. And with that, thank you very much.